Thank you, Kyle. I really thought it would be a lot more dirt on me, so I'm glad that that was the extent of it. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to say thank you actually to the Creative Mornings team, to Kyle. I know it's probably not easy to run an event this early in the morning, and I know I got you my slides quite late, so I appreciate that. Also to whoever sponsored the breakfast spread, thank you very much. So yes, I am a toy designer, and because I'm a toy designer, I think about play all the time. It seems like play should be an easy sell. People say they love play, but actually, play gets a bad rap, and I'd like to explore this. So, what's the first game that you play as a child? Well, it's Stay Alive. You find all the tricks to convince strangers to feed and protect you. You get really cute. You learn to cry. So you learn about things like manipulation. You cry till you get what you want. You upgrade from a blankie to, let's say, real dolls and building blocks, real toys. Everyone knows about the well-known cardboard box. You have tasks like learning hand-eye coordination, balance, sharing. All of this is part of your development, right? It's your full-time job. No one's going to look at this child and say, what a waste of time. Why are they playing? What's their productivity on this play session? What is the ROI on this play session? No, it's pretty much widely accepted that this is the part of their development. It's a part of their learning. This is pretty much not questioned until they're about 5 or 6. Then suddenly play is no longer part of learning. It's no longer how you learn, and worse, it's now the opposite of learning. It's a distraction from learning. For the next 12 years, at least, you are now only allowed to play in between learning. It's considered frivolous, a break from work, it's recess. Work is serious and something that should be taken with incredible focus, attention, and discipline. Your new game now is to get good marks, get a scholarship, get into university, get a great job, and then you'll have a happy life. It's a very clear path to the end goal. That's pretty much the new game you've entered. And I'm just going to put this idea out there. If school were a game, it would be a poorly designed game. Now, that's a bit controversial, I know. So before I defend this, I'd like to talk about my childhood. Sorry, a lot of my family are in the front row, so they especially like that. So I'd like to step back a bit and speak about my experiences as a student. So I came to Canada at the age of 6. My parents had, until then, raised me on a hippie commune in the Middle East, and they were as lost as I was in snowy Winnipeg. To make the transition extra difficult for me, my parents decided not only would I have a strange accent, but I would also be given a mullet. This was not cool. Just to be clear, to the left, hippie commune, to the right, Winnipeg. It therefore took me about 4 years to fit in, but I really never felt normal. While I found that kids were hard to connect with, I was really good at school. I liked the challenges of speed math tests, I liked the feeling of getting answers right, and since I had so much free time, school was my first friend in Canada. So, skip ahead to high school, and I was what you would call a really good student. Always handing things in on time, accelerated math class. Generally, I was that girl from the film Election, I was told, but without the confidence. And to add fuel to the fire, I then discovered that my parents had grossly underestimated how much university would cost if I wanted to leave Winnipeg. And I wanted to leave Winnipeg. So I worked very hard on the hope that I could get out on scholarship. It actually wasn't until the age of 17 that what I discovered was my real passion was art. My school had placed huge value on math and science, but didn't really offer art until about grade 11. They thought it was just glue and finger paint, but I felt differently, and the second I was in art school, I got hooked. It spoke to me like no other subject. I was consumed by it and felt I could finally express myself. When I had to choose my electives in grade 12, I had to choose between art and computer science. This was before Facebook and iPhones and Snapchat, and my school said they'd never had someone want to take both of those courses. Who'd want to take art and computer science? This was in the late 90s. So I had to choose, and I chose art, which was like blasphemy in my school. Teachers started to get worried. until they saw how hard I worked. So I did make it. I got out of Winnipeg, and I got into industrial design at Carleton University in Ottawa. I then experienced a complete 180 in terms of what skills and talents were valued in school. I went from being an A student to not knowing how to sketch with a pen, a permanent pen. And we were being marked on that. It was terrifying. The more disappointing part was when I realized that half my class was dyslexic. And then I discovered a lot of designers are dyslexic, and they just happened to be the strongest students in my class. They saw the world in a completely different way, in a three-dimensional way. And this, in fact, gave them a huge advantage in a program where you're creating objects, sketching, and engineering products. And all the while, they had major complexes around the fact that while in school, they were told that they were slow, that they had a disability, that they weren't good students. There are actually a number of famous dyslexics, and it is still surprising to me that we call this a disability. So this is the part where I go back to my original statement. School really is a poorly designed game, and I'm quickly going to tell you why. So let's say if school were an actual board game, these would be the game dynamics. You're in a team all grouped in the same age. The goal is to get a high mark. You go from level to level up to 12 levels, eventually ending in a document that assigns you a value that enters you into the next high level. That then has huge implications towards your future and happiness. In each level, any mark above 50 counts towards proceeding to the next level. These marks translate into letters. You get an A, a B, a C, or a D, and you go to the next level. It's not about mastery, it's just about doing more than half of the tasks well. When you are assigned your letter, that becomes your currency, your social class. A students at the top and D at the bottom. F, well, they just stay behind. In order to get high letters, high marks, you're rewarded for discipline, memorization, speed, and following instructions. Players with a certain cognitive advantage towards math and memory do best. Art and abstract skills like leadership and high social and emotional abilities are nice to have, but are difficult or impossible to measure. Being hard to assign a value to these skills makes it hard to place real value on them, so those skills, by being difficult to mark, have a lower or no value. Each level has the same material that is tested in the same way. Tests normally only happen once and are only repeated if players fail. Failure is to be avoided at all costs. Trial and error only have a place in science experiments, not in the ways that players are scored. But I've been thinking of kind of an equivalent game to this school game. I asked some design friends and some non-design friends, and they had some suggestions. So how about Trivial Pursuit? Well, you can get asked questions for certain subjects and only proceed when you answer the question correctly, but you do play in teams. There's no real way to study, and there's even an uneven amount of subject-specific questions. One was actually suggested by us, by one of our in-house teachers, was Guess Who? So players are rewarded for narrowing their thought to a single convergent outcome. There is one right answer, and the faster you get into that, the better. The only game that I could find, though, that was close to this school game was Candyland. So I've actually got the definition in Wikipedia here. Players are never required to make choices, just follow directions. The winner is predetermined by the shuffle of the cards. This is a huge part of the game dynamics of school. Schools are very rarely ask you why you are there and what is the point of school, other than the obvious, to go to university. They rarely ask, why am I learning this? Instead, we blow the punchline and say, this is what you're learning, so get good at learning that. Good games, however, are the ones that create intrigue. They use curiosity to keep players engaged. They reveal secrets and rewards along the way. Good games give the right amount of rules and restrictions while still allowing for players to learn. Rules let you make your own decisions and craft scenarios. Games play with hypotheses by failing and experimenting and rewarding players by giving them points for practice, such as multiple lives, and taking risks. We need to stop designing bad games for students and instead use play to lead students through curiosity. So I actually had an experience that was very interesting, much like this, blowing the punchline years ago when I went backpacking through Portugal and ended up on a day trip to Sintra. It's this insanely beautiful castle in a little town just outside of Lisbon. We all boarded a bus to go to this castle. This is actually my photograph. It's really stunning. When we arrived at the top of the hill, we went to the entrance and found the entrance fee was very high, like backpacker high. So a couple of new friends and I decided to wander the forest around the castle instead to avoid the big ticket. We wandered for about 2 hours. We found hobbit houses and beautiful plants, and then we found what looked like a hidden trail. We followed it and discovered this isolated mountaintop that gave the most insane view of the castle. So this view was something that we not only were incredibly excited about, but we felt that we had discovered it ourselves. And we had that ownership of it, and in that moment I thought, well, if in that scenario they had actually driven us to the front entrance of that castle, then we said no, but if they'd driven us to this lookout point, we would have taken photos and smiled and really enjoyed it. But if we had not gone that and then gone on a trail and ended up actually finding the entrance to the castle, then we would have felt like kings. We would have felt like we discovered that. And I think that's the big thing with schools that we're saying is that we're blowing the punchline. We're telling children, this is what you're learning, so learn it this way, instead of letting them discover it and find it on their own and having that ownership. So essentially, what we should be starting with in schools is questions. So my proposal is, if school is a game, then I'd like to make a suggestion that if we can make school less like Candyland and more like Clue. So Clue starts with a question. It looks at different character traits as being positive. Clue encourages curiosity. It does, however, only have one right answer. So my sister actually suggested this, and it's a very good suggestion. How about we combine school with maybe a little element of Clue and Dungeons and Dragons? So I was told not to say this, but I've actually never played Dungeons and Dragons. But I've been told that the characters in the game form a party that interacts with the setting's inhabitants and each other. Together they solve dilemmas, engage in battles, and gather treasure and knowledge. In the process, the characters earn experience points to become increasingly powerful over a series of sessions. The game requires strategy and, more importantly, imagination, because you can create new games and new game dynamics. How amazing would it be if students came into class and they found broken pieces on the ground, no teacher, and the question, what happened? I think they'd be a lot more interested in school. They'd have no instructions. It's just about open-ended discussion and discovery. Challenging students to think creatively, to approach problems as a team, and valuing that people learn differently and contribute differently is essential. Let's make school less like Candyland and more like Clue and Dungeons and Dragons. I'll give a moment if anyone wants to tweet that. Okay. Going a little bit into what's actually been happening around the world, Sugata Mitra makes this point brilliantly with what he calls this hole-in-the-wall experiment. He's the professor of educational technology at the School of Education, and he's a winner of the TED Prize. What he did was take this exact question, what happens when you leave students with a resource but no explanation? Just intrigue and see what happens. In his initial experiment, a computer was actually placed in a kiosk created within a wall in a slum in Delhi, and children were allowed to use it freely. The experiment aimed at proving that children could be taught by computers very easily without any formal training, and it worked. Children from the community taught themselves English, code, and even basic biology concepts. One student would learn how to use the computer and would then teach another. Sugata showed that by using curiosity, he designed a game to engage students rather than through a lecture. Seth Godin, known by some as a marketing guru, wrote in his book Stop Stealing Dreams about how we are asking the question, what is school for? How we are not asking the question, what is school for? He explains, are we asking kids to collect dots or connect dots? Because we're really good at counting how many dots they collect. But we teach nothing about how to connect dots. That's because you can't teach it in a textbook. You can only do it by putting kids in a situation where they can fail. Grades are an illusion. Passion and insight are reality. In the same article, they discuss a major study in 2011 about the creativity crisis in education. Researchers have discovered through tests of how kids do brainstorming tests that 98% of 3-year-olds register as creative geniuses. By the time they're 25, only 2%. Wired magazine just last week published an article about the new ways of learning. I'm just going to read a piece from here because it's essentially all that needs to be said. Access to a world of infinite information has changed how we communicate, process information, and think. Decentralized systems have proven to be more productive and agile than rigid top-down ones. Innovation, creativity, and independent thinking are increasingly crucial to the global economy. And yet the dominant model of public education is still fundamentally rooted in the Industrial Revolution that spawned it, when workplaces valued punctuality, regularity, attention, and silence above all else. We don't openly profess those values nowadays, but our educational system, which routinely tests kids on their ability to recall information and demonstrate mastery of a narrow set of skills, doubles down on the view that students are materials to be processed, programmed, and quality tested. They go on to explain that in 1970, the 3 skills required by the Fortune 500 were reading, writing, and arithmetic. In just 1999, the skills that were most in demand were teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. Teachers, we need schools that are developing these skills: teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. Teachers provide prompts and not answers. And then they should step aside so the students can teach themselves and one another. They are creating ways for children to discover their passion and uncovering a generation of geniuses in the process. There are initiatives out there that are doing this, like the Quest to Learn School in New York, which is a public school and a collaboration between the Department of Education, New Visions for Public Schools, and the Institute of Play. The school uses the underlying value that design principles such as games to create highly immersive, game-like learning experiences for students. Games work as rule-based learning systems, creating worlds in which players actively participate, use strategic thinking to make choices, solve complex problems, seek content knowledge, receive constant feedback, and consider the point of view of others. Just this September, LEGO announced that they are launching a LEGO school in Denmark. If you haven't heard already, it's very exciting. This new private school combines the International Baccalaureate with the Danish school system and LEGO's research into creativity and play. The school will incorporate play not just with LEGO, but with other building blocks and robotics to both encourage playful learning and also to test it. Their mission is highlighted by the CEO of the LEGO Foundation, who says there's still a very big gap in defining how we can better equip our children with creative and critical thinking skills to equip them to face tomorrow's challenges. In our studio, we like to pose the question, how do we help prepare students for jobs that don't even yet exist? So, personal plug here. These are the core questions and issues we're tackling with our toy designs. The question we're trying to answer is, how do we teach the skills the schools have a hard time teaching and organizations have a hard time finding? Skills such as empathy, failure, improvisation are all foundational soft skills, and they are the backbone of creativity and innovation. We know this, we say this, but we don't do much about it with our school systems. We think that the solution is in changing the game of school, from a focus on memorization and grading to focus on hands-on learning, experience, and discussion. Our first toy, which you've already seen the video on, is the Empathy and Creative Dialogue toy. It's being used in classrooms across Canada to engage students in a number of lessons through the lens of empathy. The toy is also used to help organizations because these students become adults, and adults also need these skills. Now, you've already seen the video, so I'll skip past this one. So we found that through the experiments and the workshops that we do with our toys, that play is actually a lot more than just toys. It's a creative mindset that uses rules to provide purpose rather than prescription. It also highlights the idea that discovery is joyful, experimentation is necessary, and failure is valuable. Inspiration from play can be seen throughout the design community. When I was first looking for inspiration for the power of play, I actually discovered Friedrich Frobel. He's the inventor of kindergarten, and he started his play revolution back in the 19th century. He had to convince schools that play was a method for learning, and he actually designed these toy sets. They just look like basic shapes, but they actually became the foundation of what we now call kindergarten. These toys have actually been known to inspire visionaries such as Frank Lloyd Wright, Buckminster Fuller, and Kandinsky. And more recently, and this is taken from a Wired article just written this month, theorists have argued that students should learn by playing and follow their curiosity. Einstein actually spent a year at a Pestalozzi-inspired school in the mid-1890s, and he later credited it with giving him the freedom to begin his first thought experiments on the theory of relativity. The Google founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, similarly claimed that their Montessori schooling imbued them with a spirit of independence and creativity. So, when I graduated from high school, you could say that I was an A student. I was really good at the game of school. But in the game of life, I wasn't doing as well. I could barely cook. I didn't know how to do my taxes. And I was all over the place socially and emotionally. How is it that I invested 12 years of my life, full time, and I didn't know how to take care of myself or be an equal partner in a friendship and relationship? What was worse was that I was scared to fail. I still am. I thought rules should never be broken, even though I did sometimes break them. It took me a long time to unschool myself, and I'm still going through that. Starting a toy company that is going to introduce a new way of learning through play is a crazy idea. And I'm lucky enough to have a team and business partner who also believes that this is a worthy cause and that we might and should break some rules along the way. They will also stand at a podium and totally save you while you're drinking orange juice. The idea that as a startup, that we will deal with failure, it is inevitable, but that we will actually fail many times, and that we don't always know what we're doing, and that that's okay. I never really learned that in school, and that doesn't make any sense. We need to educate the whole child, the whole student. We need to bring play and discovery back into our education, honoring the link between our humanity and our learning, between insight and laughter and play. We need to re-inspire students, and play is the best tool in our toolkit. We just need to realize that. Or rather, we need to remember it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ilana. We're going to do a Q&A, but I want to prep you for what's coming after the Q&A. So we're about to take your questions, but we close every Creative Mornings event with something we call Creative Mornings Your Turn, where I'll invite 4 of you up to give a 30-second pitch. If you're a company that's hiring, if you have a personal passion project, you need a designer, if you need an illustrator, if you need a developer, prepare those in your head. It's the first 4 people up to the microphone. And we'll do that after the Q&A. So I'd like to start with some questions. If anybody has a question for Ilana, just put your hand up and we'll have a volunteer with a microphone and make their way over to you.
Are there any other games?
Yes. So we're actually in the midst of prototyping the failure toy right now. So we talk about failure, obviously as being one of the skills that leads to creativity and innovation, but I like to relate it a lot to sex education, which is it's going to happen. It's something that we all deal with. Everyone's going to deal with failure. So it can either be something really scary that nobody talks about and we deal with in our own ways, or we can talk about how it is part of learning. It is part of that process, and hopefully that kind of opens up the discussion of what that means to being creative and innovative. Yes?
Do you need guinea pigs?
Yes, we do need guinea pigs.
So. I don't know if everyone...
Oh, sorry, I was asked if we need game guinea pigs. Yes. We work out of the Center for Social Innovation, actually. So we're the one on the annex, the one in the annex, the one on Bathurst and Bloor. So yeah, if anyone wants to come and prototype the toys in the next few months, yeah, just pass over your business cards.
I'm just wondering if you received any really noteworthy feedback from educators, like if you got any really positive responses, or just anything I sent you those interactions.
Do you mean in context with the toy, or more just around what's happening in education?
Within the toy, like how.
Sorry, while you're working with students, their teachers or their educators, if you've received any really challenging feedback, or if just something was said to you that really inspired why you're moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the toy kind of started off, it was a school project, and I thought it ended up being quite daunting. So I thought the first time I brought it into a school, I was worried that it would not teach empathy, it would actually highlight a lot of insecurities that people have. I had visions of kids crying and just getting into a lot of fights. We've been really lucky, I think, because it's game and because it's safe. When kids and when adults play it, it's really just this intense experience that you can draw on to essentially create metaphors to how you work in day-to-day life or how you listen. And so that actually becomes really interesting, and that can create more of a discussion around something that isn't necessarily you did something wrong or you could be better at this. The reaction that we've gotten from teachers actually, and we talk about this a lot, is that we went into this saying, okay, our first toy teaches empathy. But the more and more that it's being used, it's about how empathy actually opens the window into a number of different lessons. So we have a teacher who's used the toy to talk about social constructs of gender. Because of the way that one piece is described to another, you're creating an identity and a stereotype to that piece. And so then the idea is that, well, how do we do that within day-to-day life? The words that we use to describe another person creates these characteristics. I mean, we've had teachers use it for what we say we expect for conflict resolution, for leadership and teamwork classes. But there's always some really surprising stories about how teachers are using it. But we've been lucky enough, actually one of the education consultants that I first met with is in the second row. And he actually introduced this to one of the largest school boards, one of the school boards that actually has been using the toys. What they really liked was that it was essentially a universal toy that they could use with their visually impaired or students who are quote-unquote disabled, but then with the mainstream students as well. And so the idea that it could bridge that gap. So.
Speaking of gender, there have been a lot of studies recently that show that there's a divide in terms of how girls versus boys deal with failure. So I'm wondering how gender plays, if it does, in the design of your games.
That's really interesting, actually. I haven't read that. So I might get that one from you later. No, I mean, I'm very aware of the fact that I actually try not to include any sort of ideas of gender in the toys, try to make them as androgynous as possible, keeping colors and making it as open as possible. I think my sister and I actually raised, our mother is incredibly feminist, and so she used to edit our kids' books. So she wrote like he or she, or like instead of like mankind, she wrote like humankind. We weren't allowed Barbies. We weren't allowed any of those gender-specific toys. I think I was given a Barbie once for a birthday present, and her leg broke off. And when I told my mom, she was like, "Well, that's what happens when you wear stupid shoes." So, I thought for years that if I wore heels, my legs would fall off. So yeah, it may be a conscious and a not conscious decision, but when I design the toys, I don't really have a gender in mind. So.
This is a pretty loaded question.
All right, shoot.
I have a 2.5-year-old. As a parent, as a designer, as a feminist myself, someone who wants to encourage play, can I send my kid to the TDSB? Is public school okay? Do I need to be seeking out alternative schools? Or can she go to public school and then I just make sure in the after hours that we're doing lots of play and stuff at home? Maybe even your educator has opinions about this.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a parent. I haven't had to deal with the TDSB as a parent. I think that there are some amazing alternative schools. Actually, I believe within the TDSB there are some alternative public schools as well. There are some schools that are trying to introduce play and different approaches, but I don't really know. I think that what we're trying to do with the toys is say that, you don't have to commit to this program or you don't have to commit to this curriculum. It's really just as a resource that in those moments that we can bring play and that we can talk about its value, that we can kind of embed that into those lessons. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I don't know how I would make the decision right now.
I'm just noticing as you go through the whole description of school that's such a perfect description of what I went through, and kind of I can see in my working process as an entrepreneur, I still have it set up in my business like I go through it in a linear fashion and try to avoid failure at all costs, but as an entrepreneur it's impossible because I have to fail to be successful in business. So what would be your, I don't know, key, like top 3 ways to reincorporate play, or places to start to reincorporate, because I get so serious in my business, but I'd like to be, I'm sure it's the end of the world every day, but I'd like to bring that element of play back into it to make it, to make it more fun for myself and my employees and the people that want to get involved.
Yeah, well, it's funny because so much of my story is about how I was really this A student, and then we talk about play and the importance of empathy and being playful. But exactly, I mean, I'm very much the product of my education. I feel like there are disasters every day, and as an entrepreneur, you have to fail. We're still trying to figure that out, but I think in our studio we try to enforce, although we've actually been lagging. But usually Fridays in the afternoon, someone will bring in a board game or games, and we'll actually play them and test the toys. We'll have play days on Friday. I think there are elements of it that are quite large, and there are elements of it that are quite small. Making sure that, one thing that I've actually learned, so I've been working in a lot of co-working spaces, so the Center for Social Innovation is essentially like the 3rd co-working space that I've worked in. But when you have a culture that is more playful, it's really just about creating more, I don't want to say a family, but taking aspects of a community and kind of embedding those into the way that you work. So things like making sure that you can sit and eat together sometimes. Making sure that you understand the value of taking a coffee break and making the coffee area really exciting with lots of pens and whiteboards nearby, because most of the most interesting conversations and the ones where you kind of let your guard down and things aren't as serious, or when you're getting a coffee and you're complaining about this problem that you have, or you finally take that break. And I've seen time and again that the spaces that really understand that are the ones that they don't hide the coffee machine somewhere else. They understand that that's actually where most of that creative and playful collaboration happens. We're still trying to figure out more ways that we can be playful, because very easily we can walk into the studio and be like, everything's on fire. It's really hard to be as playful in that, but we're still trying to figure that out.
Time for one more question.
What's your take on digital play versus physical play?
That's a great question. So I read a lot about Jane McGonigal, and I think that the power of video games can actually be pretty incredible. For some people, they do need it can get unhealthy if it just becomes a complete escape, but there's a lot that we can learn from virtual games. I really like the idea of face-to-face tangible play. I think that there's something where you're a lot more connected with your physical self when you're playing. That being said, I wouldn't want to state one is better than the other. We don't do digital. We stick with just physical products. And I think what's really nice about that is that while something is digital and you're in it, it can be really quite intense, but then you can turn that screen off. And I think that what's really incredible is if we had these objects that represent these skills and these traits that we really value, we're constantly reminded of that when we see them. And let's say if they're on our desk or they're on a shelf, having them present and there without actually having to turn on a computer screen and think about entering into it, having it kind of around us, I think there's a huge power to having a tangible objects.
Thanks so much, Ilana. Unfortunately, I'm going to cut the questions there, but